1. Elizabeth Bathory, the Blood Countess. In the shadows of the 16th century Carpathian Mountains, Elizabeth Bathory became the most prolific female serial killer in history. A high-ranking noblewoman, she was untouchable by the law. While her husband was away at war, rumors began to circulate about the screams echoing from Chaite Castle. It's alleged she lured hundreds of young peasant girls with the promise of work, only to subject them to unthinkable torture. The most enduring legend claims she bathed in the blood of virgins to preserve her youth, a story that likely inspired the myth of Dracula. When investigators finally raided her home in 1610, they found girls dead, dying, and imprisoned. Because of her noble status, she couldn't be executed. Instead, she was walled alive into a small room with only tiny slits for food and air. She died 4 years later, leaving behind a legacy of vanity and cruelty that still haunts Hungarian folklore. Was she a monster, or a powerful woman framed by political enemies? The truth remains buried in the castle walls. 2. Belgunes, the Black Widow of La Porte. Belgunes turned the American dream into a nightmare. Standing 6 feet tall and weighing over 200 pounds, Belle was a formidable woman who ran a farm in La Porte, Indiana. In the early 1900s, she began placing Lonely Hearts ads in newspapers, seeking a gentlemanly suitor with means. Men traveled from across the country, bringing their life savings to win her hand. None of them ever left. Belle was a master of insurance fraud, likely starting with the mysterious deaths of her 2 husbands and several children, all of whom brought in hefty payouts. The horror was finally revealed in 1908 when her house burned down. In the ruins, investigators found the headless body of a woman and the remains of dozens of suitors buried in the hog pen. But here is the kicker. The headless body didn't match Belle's measurements. Many believe she faked her own death, planted a body, and disappeared with a fortune in gold, leaving the world to wonder where the Black Widow struck next. 3. H. Holmes, the Murder Castle. While Chicago was celebrating the 1893 World's Fair, H. Holmes was building a labyrinth of death. He designed a 3-story hotel that occupied an entire city block, but he was the only one who knew its true layout. He frequently fired contractors so no one person understood the building's terrifying features. Soundproof rooms, secret chutes, trapdoors, and rooms equipped with gas jets to suffocate guests in their sleep. Holmes was a charming con artist who seduced women for their life savings before leading them into his murder castle. In the basement, he had a kiln and acid vats to dissolve remains, sometimes cleaning the skeletons to sell to medical schools. He was eventually caught not for murder, but for an insurance scam involving a business partner. When police finally explored the castle, they were horrified by what they found. Holmes confessed to 27 murders, but some historians believe his victim count exceeded 200. He walked to the gallows in 1896, famously asking for his coffin to be encased in concrete so he could never be disturbed. 4. Jack the Ripper, the Ghost of Whitechapel. In 1888, the fog-filled streets of London's Whitechapel district were the hunting grounds for a killer who would change criminal profiling forever. Known as Jack the Ripper, he targeted women in the dead of night, performing surgical-style mutilations that suggested he had medical knowledge. The canonical 5 victims, Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly, were murdered with increasing brutality, sending the British Empire into a state of panic. What made the Ripper a viral sensation even in the 19th century was his interaction with the media. He sent taunting letters to the police, including the infamous From Hell letter, which arrived with half of a preserved human kidney. Despite the London Metropolitan Police and Scotland Yard deploying hundreds of officers, the killer vanished without a trace. From royal family members to local butchers, over 500 suspects have been named over the last century. But the Ripper remains the world's most famous unidentified killer, a ghost that disappeared into the London fog. 5. Albert DeSalvo, the Boston Strangler. Between 1962 and 1964, a wave of terror gripped Boston. 13 women ranging in age from 19 to 85 were found strangled in their apartments. There were no signs of forced entry. The strangler was someone who could talk his way past a locked door. He often left the bodies in grotesque positions, using the victim's own stockings or scarves as the murder weapon. The city was so paralyzed with fear that sales of locks and dogs skyrocketed. The breakthrough came when Albert DeSalvo, already in custody for other crimes, began confessing to a cellmate. He provided details about the crime scenes that only the killer could have known. However, many investigators were skeptical because DeSalvo was a compulsive liar and didn't fit the initial witness descriptions. He was never actually tried for the murders, only for unrelated sexual assaults. It wasn't until 2013, decades after DeSalvo was stabbed to death in prison, that DNA evidence finally linked him to the last victim. Yet, debate still rages. Was he the only strangler, or did he take the fall for others? 6. John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown. John Wayne. Gacy was a respected member of his Chicago suburb. He was a precinct captain, a successful contractor, and even had his picture taken with First Lady Rosalind Carter. But his most famous mask was Pogo the Clown, a character he played at children's parties and hospitals. Beneath the face paint and the community service lay a predator who targeted young men and boys, luring them to his home with promises of work or by posing as a police officer. Between 1972 and 1978, Gacy murdered at least 33 people. The sheer scale of his depravity was discovered when a missing persons report led police to his house. Officers noticed a faint, sickly smell of decay coming from the floorboards. When they tore up the floor, they found a literal graveyard in the crawl space. 29 bodies were pulled from the mud beneath his home. Gacy's case became the blueprint for the evil clown trope in pop culture. Before his execution in 1994, his last words were a defiant insult, proving that the man behind the makeup was a monster until the very end. 7. Rodney Alcala, the dating game killer. Rodney Alcala is the ultimate example of a killer hiding in plain sight. In 1978, at the height of his murder spree, Alcala appeared as a contestant on the hit TV show The Dating Game. He won the date, though the woman later refused to go out with him because she found him creepy. She was luckier than she knew. Alcala was a genius with a high IQ who used his artistic photography to lure victims, promising to make them famous models. Police believe Alcala may have killed as many as 130 people across the United States. He was a sadist who would often strangle his victims until they lost consciousness, wait for them to wake up, and repeat the process. When he was finally arrested, investigators found a storage locker filled with thousands of photos of unidentified women and children. For decades, the FBI has released these photos to the public, hoping to solve cold cases. Alcala died in prison in 2021, but the true extent of his collection may never be fully understood. 8. Dennis Rader, BTK. For 30 years, the residents of Wichita, Kansas lived in the shadow of a killer who called himself BTK, Bind, Torture, Kill. Dennis Rader wasn't just a killer, he was a narcissist who craved attention. He began his spree in 1974 by murdering the Otero family and continued to terrorize the city for decades, sending letters to the media and local police to brag about his work. Then, in 1991, he went silent. The world thought BTK was dead or in prison, but in 2004, Rader couldn't resist the spotlight any longer. He began sending new packages to the police, including a floppy disk. Rader asked the police, "Can you trace a floppy disk? Be honest." The police lied and said no. That disk contained metadata linked to Christ Lutheran Church and a user named Dennis. Within days, the man who was a Boy Scout leader and a compliance officer was in handcuffs. His capture proved that a serial killer's ego is often the very thing that leads to their downfall. 9. Ted Bundy, the charismatic monster. Ted Bundy broke the mold of what people thought a serial killer looked like. He was handsome, articulate, and a former law student. He used his charm as a weapon, often wearing a fake arm cast or using crutches to appear vulnerable, asking young women to help him carry books to his car. Once they were close enough, his gentleman persona vanished. Across the 1970s, Bundy went on a cross-country rampage, murdering at least 30 women, though the real number could be closer to 100. Bundy's story is legendary not just for the killings, but for his two daring escapes from custody. once jumping from a second-story courthouse window. He eventually fled to Florida, where he committed his most brutal attacks on a sorority house. During his televised trial, he acted as his own attorney, flirting with the cameras and even proposing to a witness in court. He was executed in the electric chair in 1989, but his ability to blend into polite society remains the terrifying reason why we're told never to trust a stranger. 10. David Berkowitz, son of Sam. The summer of Sam in 1977 was a time of pure chaos for New York City. A gunman was stalking the streets, targeting young couples in parked cars with a .44 caliber bulldog revolver. He didn't have a clear motive, and the randomness of the attacks made it impossible for the NYPD to predict his next move. The killer left bizarre handwritten letters for the police, claiming he was the son of Sam and a behemoth that could not be stopped. When David Berkowitz was finally caught due to a simple parking ticket near a crime scene, he told police a story that shocked the world. He claimed his neighbor's black Labrador retriever, Harvey, was possessed by a 6,000-year-old demon that ordered him to kill. While Berkowitz later admitted he made up the demon dog story for attention, the Son of Sam laws were created because of him, preventing criminals from profiting from their stories through books or movies. To this day, the image of Berkowitz's wide-eyed, smiling mugshot remains one of the most chilling icons of true crime. 11. Jeffrey Dahmer, the Milwaukee Cannibal. Jeffrey Dahmer's crimes were so extreme they seemed to belong in a horror movie. Between 1978 and 1991, Dahmer murdered 17 men and boys in Milwaukee. He wasn't just interested in the act of killing. He was obsessed with control and keeping his victims. His apartment was a graveyard of horrors filled with preserved skulls and body parts. He even attempted to create zombies by performing crude brain surgeries on his victims so they would never leave him. The most tragic part of Dahmer's story is how many times he was almost caught. In one instance, a 14-year-old victim escaped and was found by police, but Dahmer convinced the officers the boy was his adult lover having a lover's quarrel. The police actually helped the boy back into Dahmer's apartment, where he was killed later that night. Dahmer was eventually caught in 1991 and sentenced to 15 life terms. He was beaten to death by a fellow inmate in 1994, but the details of his house of horrors changed the way the world views the dark side of human obsession. 12. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. In 1984 and 1985, Los Angeles was under siege by a man who seemed to be everywhere at once. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, broke into homes through unlocked windows and doors in the middle of the night. He had no specific type of victim. He killed men, women, and children of all ages. He was a dedicated Satanist who forced his victims to swear to Satan and left pentagrams drawn on their walls and even their bodies. The terror ended in August 1985 in a way that rarely happens in true crime. After his photo was published in the newspaper, Ramirez was spotted by a group of residents in East LA as he tried to hijack a car. A mob of angry citizens recognized him, chased him down, and beat him until the police arrived to save him. During his trial, he was unrepentant, showing off a pentagram drawn on his palm. Ramirez died of natural causes on death row in 2013, having never shown a shred of remorse for the Night Stalker era of blood. 13. Harold Shipman, Dr. Death. We are taught to trust doctors with our lives, but Harold Shipman was the ultimate betrayal of that trust. A family physician in Greater Manchester, England, Shipman is believed to be the most prolific serial killer in modern history. His method was subtle. He would visit his elderly patients at home and administer a lethal dose of diamorphine under the guise of medical care. He would then watch them die, calmly sign their death certificates, and even forge their wills to inherit their money. Because his victims were often old and expected to pass away, he got away with murder for over 20 years. He was finally caught in 1998 when the daughter of his last victim noticed her mother's will had been clumsily forged on a typewriter. An investigation revealed that Shipman had killed an estimated 250 people. He never confessed and never gave a reason for his crimes. His case led to a total transformation of the British medical system, ensuring that no single doctor could ever have that much power over life and death again. 14. Pedro Lopez, the Monster of the Andes. Pedro Lopez is a name that doesn't get mentioned as often in the West, but his crimes are among the most staggering in history. Operating across Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador in the 1970s, Lopez targeted young girls, often from poor families. He confessed to murdering over 300 children. He was caught when a flash flood unearthed a mass grave containing many of his victims, leading him to confess his crimes to the authorities with disturbing pride. However, the real shock came after his arrest. Because of Ecuadorian law at the time, the maximum sentence was only 16 years. After being declared insane and receiving treatment in a psychiatric hospital, the man who confessed to 300 murders was released in 1998 for good behavior. He was deported to Colombia, where he vanished shortly after. Today, he would be in his 70s. Interpol still has an advisory out for him, but the monster of the Andes remains a free man, or a ghost, somewhere in South America. 15. Eileen Wuornos, the Damsel of Death. Eileen Wuornos' life was a cycle of trauma that ended in a spree of violence. Working as a sex worker along Florida's highways, she murdered 7 men between 1989 and 1990. Unlike many other serial killers who kill for sexual gratification, Wuornos claimed she acted in self-defense against men who tried to rape or assault her. This claim made her a controversial figure. Some saw her as a cold-blooded killer, while others saw her as a victim of a system that failed her. Wuornos was eventually caught after she crashed a victim's car and was linked to the scene by forensic evidence. Her trial was a media circus, and her erratic behavior in court, often screaming at the jury, led many to question her mental state. Despite her claims of self-defense, she was convicted and sentenced to death. She was executed by lethal injection in 2002. Her story, famously portrayed by Charlize Theron in the movie Monster, remains a haunting look at how a lifetime of abuse can create a cycle of unthinkable violence.